All right, good morning, everyone. I'm Chuck Barjon. I'm the director at the Center for Invasive Species and Ecosystem Health at the University of Georgia, where the EDDMapS program is run out of. And with me today is Rebecca Wallace. I'm going to kind of give presentation of an overview of some examples of how we've migrated existing programs into EDDMapS. And then Rebecca's going to jump on and go through some things on the actual EDDMapS website, some tools that would be useful to help getting a program started in EDDMapS and help continuing to build a program in EDDMapS. And as always, these office hours are recorded and posted on YouTube as well as on our EDDMapS training page. So let's get right into this. Just as a overview, EDDMapS stands for Early Detection and Distribution Mapping System. It has been around since 2006. And the four things that are really key when we talk about EDDMapS is including the real-time tracking of invasive species and pest occurrences, having those local maps that will work for SISMAs, CWMAs, PRISMs, as well as state and national maps. And then just making it easy to report things, making it very simple for anyone to be able to report data and manage that data as well. And then we've also got a great library of identification and management information. And part of that is through the Bugwood image system. So we created EDDMapS to make invasive species mapping easy, to help increase the public awareness of invasive species, give the public something that they can do to help with the problem. So we can facilitate local early detection and rapid response programs where you can provide that landscape level of mapping by pulling together data from a bunch of different sources and then being able to document change over time and be a platform to support additional applications. And in some of these examples I'm going to go through today, there's good examples of all of these and just ways different organizations have implemented EDDMapS. And so we're going to start with the pythons and the Everglades. What a place to start. But the first smartphone app that we developed to go into EDDMapS came out of the Python problem in the Everglades. So it's a great place to start. So when the pythons really started to become a problem for the National Park Service and surrounding areas, the Park Service decided to put some resources into helping the Python problem. And one of those projects was creating the I've Got One app. And so the first app that was created for EDDMapS was called I've Got One. If you're not from Florida, you may not have heard of it, but it's focused on reporting invasive species in Florida. We decided not just to focus on pythons, but to focus on all the species. We partnered with Florida Fish and Wildlife Conservation Commission. We partnered with the University of Florida to pull in a lot of different resources on plants and animals into one app. And what has really worked with this implementation is anytime something is found and there's a press release that goes out, like in this case over on the side here, an anaconda found swimming in the St. Johns River in northern Florida. When that report comes out, there's this text that goes in every single one of them. You know, this incident shows how important it is to report sightings of non-native wildlife, including constrictor snakes. If you see a non-native fish or wildlife, please report them either to the hotline, which is 188 I've Got One, online at I'veGotOne.org, which redirects you to EDDMapS, or using the I've Got One smartphone app. So this is a way that consistent message, whether it's a bumper sticker, whether it's a billboard, is used throughout the state, and a great way to make sure that the public continues to see and they can remember that I've Got One brand. We've done some rebranding of that recently and kind of included it where it could be used for multiple species. That app has been downloaded, close to 75,000 times, combining iOS and Android downloads, and we continue to get downloads each year. We've done some improvements of that app recently, And some of these improvements are going to be rolled out into the EDDMapS app if you're familiar with that. But just looking at ways to personalize it better, to make it more user-friendly, include better maps, and include, an explore feature that allows you to see, hey, what's been reported near me recently? What, having I've got one page where you can see your previous reports and easily access those. And then we're looking at some ways to include more gamification features into those as well. The Washington Invasive Species Council came to us. They had built a smartphone app, worked with a contractor, built a smartphone app, and that smartphone app, the platform it was built on, was no longer supported. So we worked with the Washington Invasive Species Council to take the code, the existing code that they had, and modify it where instead of reporting into this database that was now obsolete, it would report to EDDMapS. And so it's been a great partnership with the Washington Invasive Species Council. They have also, and I'll show you an example of another state in a few minutes, but they've also embedded the reporting forms directly on their website. So you don't have to send the user to EDDMapS. You can keep them on your website and make it very easy for them to report something when they want to. And we work with lots of different groups to do that. And then the Washington Invasives app for both iPhone and Android has been completely changed, where the reports go now to EDDMapS, and it's been expanded to include more species as well. Of interest, the first northern giant hornet that was found in the United States was actually reported through the Washington Invasives app. So great success story where it did exactly what it was supposed to. The species had been found in British Columbia already. We added it to the Washington Invasives app, and then it was reportable for the user through that. The state of Utah came to us and had tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of records that have been collected over time on noxious weeds in the state of Utah. A lot of those were collected using Garmin GPS units. And so where they would go every year to the same location, the Garmin would record slightly different latitude and longitude each time. So you ended up with just a mass of points and not a good way to tell a story about those points. So we said, okay, let's think about this, and let's figure out a way to make this easier, where you can go in and combine, we can combine the data, not lose any data, but take and say, okay, if any record is within this 20-meter grid, then let's take it, make the oldest one the original record, and then make all of the ones after that are in that grid revisits of that original record. So you take the number of records, in this case over 200,000, down to about 130,000, and it makes it a lot easier to manage those populations, thinking about them as populations versus individual points going through time. And so that was the first step of getting them tied in. There was a lot of training that went on after this to get the county weed coordinators included and part of this project and doing something differently by using EDDMapS. Around the same time, Montana Department of Agriculture came to us and said, we need a way to do these revisits offline. We need a way to manage our data in areas where we don't have good cell phone coverage. And so working with both Utah Department of Ag and Utah Weed Supervisors Association, as well as the Montana Department of Agriculture, they came together, they pulled together the funding so we could build the EDDMapS Pro app that hopefully many of you have used now. And so that's how the EDDMapS Pro app got started. It was definitely an initial start focused on noxious weeds in the Western United States. And so, and really with county weed coordinators being the target audience. And that's why there are features in there like downloading the data at the county level. And what's pretty awesome is now, all these years later, you can look at a similar map of square rose knapweed, and instead of just seeing a sea of red points, you see the red points, but you also see points that have been treated and points that have been eradicated. And so now there's a good story to tell, not just that the state is covered with these weeds, but the state's has these weeds, and we are doing something about them, and here's the change over time. They also are taking this data and putting it into a model in ArcGIS, something called SIPA, and using the SIPA tool to help write the grant applications and figure out what is funded each year through their state funds. So a pretty incredible implementation, and they're doing some really great work there in Utah. Another group that came to us was the Morton Arboretum. They were looking at the potential for spotted lanternfly in Illinois, and they said, we really need to get a grasp on where Tree of Heaven is in the state, so we can then use that to help monitor for spotted lanternfly. So over the period of a couple of years, we worked with them, and they helped collect data both in EDDMapS and then pulling in our naturalist data from our triage system, and make the map, really document a lot of points of Tree of Heaven in the state. And now, taking the EDDMapS Pro platform, they can take that data and assign different trees to different users to go monitor. And then once those assignments are made through EDDMapS Pro, they can click on the point they're visiting, and they can say, hey, is Tree of Heaven still there? And did you see spotted lanternfly? So just implementing a tool, making it very easy for them to fill in the distribution of the host species, in this case, Tree of Heaven, as well as a way to do revisits where you both focus on whether the Tree of Heaven is still there, and also whether or not spotted lanternfly was found. And if nothing else, hopefully it will just be a lot of good negative spotted lanternfly data. I mentioned Washington embedding their reporting form. We also partnered with South Carolina Department of Natural Resources to do the same thing. And so through their website, you can go in, choose whether you're reporting a plant, an animal, an insect, or a disease. And then that data, that form is embedded in their website. It is emailed them just like if they were reporting it on the EDDMapS website, but they never have to leave that website. If they're logged in to EDDMapS, it remembers their login information. If they don't have an account, then it allows them to put in the information needed to create an account and move that data forward. And as something, if you've seen the news this week, we have a new hornet in Georgia, the yellow-legged hornet. And so one of the things, they reached out to us this week and said, hey, we need to add that to our reporting form so it's available, and people can start reporting it if they see it in South Carolina, especially since the population that's been found in Georgia is in Savannah, which is right across the river from South Carolina. The state of Minnesota, we've got some great partnerships there, both with Minnesota Natural Resources and Minnesota Department of Agriculture. For the natural resources side of things, we've partnered both with the terrestrial plants, the forestry group, as well as the aquatic species group, and implemented reporting forms. They've got information on their website for reporting, and then very similar on Minnesota Department of Ag, where you can very easily go through and report species directly to EDDMapS from their website. One of the things that Minnesota DNR needed was an infested waters map. It was something that, these water bodies are infested with these species. And so we worked with them to create this map, as well as a list that shows where those infested waters are on the map, and then that data is linked back to EDDMapS data. For Minnesota Department of Agriculture, they're pulling their noxious weed points from EDDMapS and then mapping them on their application, because they're looking at a subset of weeds. Then they can show those on a map on their website, just pulling from the data feed from EDDMapS. Another cool example, I think anyway, was when Asian longhorn beetle was found in Ohio. Ohio State reached out to us. It's been a while ago and said, "Hey, we need an app for Asian longhorn beetle." And I said, "Okay, well, let's just not do an Asian longhorn beetle app. Let's do an invasive species app for Ohio, or maybe even for the region." And so, we worked with partners in Wisconsin, in Ohio, in Minnesota, and we implemented the Great Lakes Early Detection Network, which was focused on reporting all types of invasive species, and then that data feeds directly into EDDMapS as well. So, it was one of those things where just the appearance of this little bug that we see on the screen, led us to filling in another part of the country with the regional app. Now, this is being migrated now into the EDDMapS app, but the Great Lakes app is still available and you can report through it. Probably 15 years ago, there was an effort to better identify where the outer ranges of wild pigs were in the United States. They branded that squill on pigs, and so we worked with a group out of Oregon at the time to build a smartphone reporting app for wild pigs. But other than a bump when there was a media campaign around it, the app never really caught on. And so that campaign has kind of been revived over the last few years. And so we've been working with partners in Washington, Oregon, and Montana to implement an updated version of that app using the new branding. And so here's an example of what that looks like. And we're going to be continuing to work with them as well as with APHIS to promote this app and help push it out to the users. So we, take what we've learned from the previous time, focused on a campaign, and then implement that campaign better. And the last couple of things I want to talk about is sometimes what partnership looks like is not implementing EDDMapS. It's that Texas, Alaska, California, for example, have robust programs that have been in place for a long time, where they have a database of invasive species and reporting forms and all. And so instead of, handling everything for them, we just pull data from them on a routine basis. And then that data is included in the EDDMapS. So the surrounding states that may be using EDDMapS can see that data, but they still maintain it in their state. In the Texas example and the Alaska example, we built smartphone apps in both cases for them to kind of help feed data into their program, and then they feed that data back out to us. In California, CalFlora is a database of all taxa plants in California. And so we've worked with them and with California Invasive Plant Council over the last few years to be able to import data from CalFlora into EDDMapS directly instead of kind of doing a database dump. The data is pulled automatically, and about 400,000 records have been pulled of invasive plants from into EDDMapS from CalFlora. So different way of thinking about a partnership, but also an interesting story. And as I mentioned with the yellow-legged hornet, being able to quickly adapt as new species come out. As the yellow-legged hornet was found, that species was added and made reportable to EDDMapS. And then, as the elm zigzag sawfly has started to show up in different areas along the East Coast, through our Bugwood Images system, we already had pictures of this species from a partnership that we had done with a group in Hungary, where we were collecting pictures of species that have not yet been found in the United States. So when or if they are found, we have those resources ready to go. And so finally, there's a lot of other examples of a lot of different partners we've worked with over the time. I wanted to choose some of the smaller state-based groups to kind of give you a concept of what is possible and how we can work with you to implement and improve your program and take some of the hassle of the technology off of the organization and do it. One final thing I want to mention before I turn this over to Rebecca. We are planning a workshop in Idaho the first week of December, and it is focused on all of the skills that you need to implement a on-the-ground volunteer program around reporting and invasive species, or just around invasive species in general. And so if you're interested in attending that workshop, there's a nomination form where you can nominate yourself or someone else on the web, and you can go to wildspotter.org, or you can go to invasivefree.org. And either one of those websites will take you to that form, and you can find out more information about that workshop, or you can reach out to us directly and we'll be glad to. So we've got a couple of questions. I'm gonna let Rebecca, I'm gonna stop sharing my screen, let Rebecca start sharing hers, and then we can jump in and talk about some of those questions that have come up after she does her part.
All right, thank you, Chuck. And so yeah, just keep putting your questions in the chat so that when we get to them, we can kind of check them off as we go through them. Yeah. Okay. So I'm just going to go over a couple of the different places on EDDMapS that you can look at for this whole concept of, okay, I want to look into EDDMapS and see if this is the kind of something I want to participate in some way. So Chuck went over some very different ways that different groups have worked with us, in some cases completely, going over to EDDMapS and we're their database now and they're using EDDMapS products one way or another, all the way to, well, we're just sharing data back and forth with EDDMapS. And any of those partnership types are completely, valid for whatever your system or program is kind of used to doing. If you go to the EDDMapS website, there's this tab for tools and training. If you go to the training page, this is where we have, imagine this, a lot of our training materials. We have a bunch of different named options here, and a lot of them are available in a few different formats. So we have EDDMapS training materials in the top left, and it goes through, here's a document for, walking through the different apps we have, setting up different features we have in the website. We have our 2022 and 2023 training videos and presentation videos that happened during the EDDMapS Summit. So you can go through and see, okay, well, this is where we announced what the projects are and how they work, how the different groups, used the EDDMapS to report points or polygons, whatever works for their particular systems. We have additional training materials further down where we talk about, okay, well, here's how you use the EDDMapS app, general features of the different apps we have, walkthroughs. We have a whole section here on specifically EDDMapS Pro training videos. These are like 1 to 2, maybe 3-minute videos on very specific topics surrounding EDDMapS Pro. We even have them broken out because there are some visual differences between the iPhone and the Android platform. So those exist there. So you can see, okay, well, I want to know how to do this very specific task. We probably have a video or a document covering that concept. We have training videos on WildSpotter. So Chuck mentioned WildSpotter very briefly. That's an app in a system we have for reporting invasive species on public lands. If you're a recreationalist of some sort, that's where that system comes in. We even have some very specific, we worked with Colorado on how to kind of their system works and how it kind of integrates with EDDMapS. So these are just some different training materials that exist. Here's our past office hours. That's what Chuck mentioned earlier, that these are recorded. And if you know someone who should, look into one of these past office hours, or you missed one, this is where they exist. So just letting you know that these different things exist. We also have, and it may not be up here, but I do have a document on, what app should I be using? So we have EDDMapS, EDDMapS Pro, WildSpotter. Those are our 3 main apps that are kind of nationwide available for use. Chuck mentioned I've got one that's more Florida focused. And we have a lot of people who use I've Got One even from outside of Florida, since it was our first reporting app that was used. We had a lot of data initially that was kind of coming from places outside of Florida because it's what was available. But going through and kind of figuring out, okay, am I needing to report revisits? Okay, well then EDDMapS Pro is the app you're looking for. Do I have a volunteer group that they're just going to go out one day and report all the whatever they see? That's more of an EDDMapS app application that would be more appropriate. So going through and figuring out, like, okay, how does this system work? What are the features that are available? That's where this training page really comes into play. So you can see, all the different features and tools that exist within here. If you go to the tools, let me make sure that there's nothing else I want to talk about here. So yeah, if you go to the tools page, you can go through and see some of the different queries and whatnot that you can use to figure out kind of what's going on maybe in your area, who's going to be involved in things like we have report verifier lookup. So if you want to know, in, let's say, Ontario, if I report garlic mustard, who's going to get that report to review it? In this case, here's a whole list of people who are going to get that record to look at it and see if it's correct, and then it's showing up on the map. And then you can just move this pointer around. So let's say move it over to Alberta, and hey, Kelly, there you are right there. Hi, Kelly. So these are just some different tools available so you can see kind of what's going on and the people who are using it. You can also, look up the advanced query tool. You can look at a species status report by other geographic location. So, you can see kind of what's going on in your area and help make some decisions on is anybody working in your area to report invasive species. If you have existing data, we have bulk data resources. So we have resources for, if you're uploading data to us, if you're requesting data from us, you can see the data dictionary. So you know how to interpret the data, or how to, what kind of format that our database is. So you can see if it meshes well with what your needs are. And so you can see, how to upload the bulk data and what to expect, and what data templates exist and so forth. So we've got a bunch of different options for these different resources and training materials. If I go to my EDDMapS, you can also see we have this dashboard here. So this is my dashboard. These are the records that I've submitted. So you can see this. Everybody who has an EDDMapS account has a dashboard, whether it has data in it or not. You see, I added some feral pig data to kind of backfill some of the records for recent that were recently published through like feral pig projects and whatnot. So it just goes under my account because I'm the one uploading the data. But if I go to dashboard and I see I have my dashboard, which it defaults to, my verifier dashboard. So I am a reviewer for EDDMapS records. I don't review a lot because that's not part of my job necessarily. And then the EDDMapS dashboard. So this is another place you can look at to see, okay, what's going on here? What's going on in my state, in my county, and you can get visual represent. It's taking forever to load because I have it set to the US. So if I change this, we'll change this. Let's change it to Florida, since I see one of our Florida partners in there. And so we can see records that are coming in from Florida. You can see the types of records, species, the reporters. I can see what's being reported as treated or eradicated, and how the different records are coming in, where they're coming in from, and the actual individual records that are coming in, things like that. So we can see we've got, sorry, where'd the pop-up go? It was there just a second ago, but we've got over 300 reports coming in from I've Got One Android. I've Got One iPhone coming in. We've got records from the EDDMapS website itself coming in. We're, like Chuck said earlier, we're pulling in iNaturalist data, and then the people in Florida are triaging that data. They're the ones that are going in and saying what should go into the EDDMapS website, what should not go into the EDDMapS website. That way they have control over, do we really need 10,000 more records of brown and knoll when we already have 5,000 records in EDDMapS? Do we need to know, that much about brown and knoll? You can see where the records are coming in most, and so on and so forth. Like you could say, just keep going down and seeing what's coming in and where. This is a pretty good graphical tool to see what's going on in a state, in a county, and so forth. And you can also see this green button here. I think that's fairly new. You can download these graphics into PowerPoint. So if you want to give a presentation, you can just download this and it'll put it in PowerPoint slides and all ready there for you. So you don't have to try to, manipulate things otherwise. Like I say, you can do bulk uploads. So bulk uploads go through this tab on the left, and it'll just take you through the bulk upload procedure. So if you have existing Excel data, ArcGIS data, you can upload that data to us. It's gonna ask you a bunch of questions about the data so that I interpret it correctly. And then I will go through the data and do a lot of me looking at the data to make sure it's correct and accurate. There's no conflicting information. There's a lot that goes into vetting the data before it goes into the database. So, and Rachel Diaz knows that, because when they send in data, I'll go back and say, okay, some of these things, yes, you sent in thousands of records, but there's like 3 records here that have this going on and 2 records here that have this going on. She's always been very prompt about replying back and getting those things figured out. So it's really great to work with our partners on getting this data to go in as accurately as possible. So I think that's about right. Like I said, we've got obviously tons and tons of other features, but this is focusing specifically on, you have an existing program. Do you want to incorporate EDDMapS into that program in some way? So we have lots of other, like I said, training materials to show what all of these other features are, and how they're used by the different programs and projects. So Chuck, if you want to answer some of those questions about merging points, I think that'll be a good place to start.
Yeah, absolutely. So we've got a couple of questions about the 20-meter grid, and I guess probably I should have explained that a little bit better. What we were able to do is, I think if you go to 5 decimal places on a latitude and longitude, then that's 11-meter accuracy. And so the 20-meter concept came because if you could round the data to the closest 11-meter area, then what that would do is ultimately create that grid and combine those records. And so it's not perfect, and it probably works better in somewhere like Utah than it would in other places, just because of the landscape there. But it at least gets you to where the population is, so you can do something about it. And then there's one population that you focus on versus a whole bunch of different populations that all have to be managed. And we have talked about doing that in other areas. Kelly asked that question in the chat, and And we just haven't had a group that said, hey, this is enough of a problem that we want to do this. But yes, it's something we've definitely, and some of it because you've got to really get the partners understanding what you're doing with the data. You're not losing any data, but when you had a bunch of points that were definitely on top of each other, we are looking at ways for when you report something in an area for it to query the server and go, hey, this has already been reported nearby. And so just to do some of that intelligence when new reports come in, just to kind of help the user. And it's one of those things, it's a problem, but it's not necessarily a huge problem, except for in areas where there had been every year taking data with the Garmin and the data stacking up. Another question in the chat is there a reason why Michigan is not included in the Great Lakes group? So Michigan is included in the app. There's a project called the Midwest Invasive Species Information Network that's based out of Michigan, and so they have an app. We've been sharing data with them as well, but it wasn't that Michigan was excluded. It's just that Michigan was not one of the key partners that were included when we did that. There's other states that are included as well, whose state agency or university logos.
I will say that we have had like a couple SISMAs from Michigan work with us. So it's not that we're, deliberately excluding Michigan in any way. And we do have some interaction in Michigan.
So a couple of other points in the chat. Kelly bringing that jurisdiction do have point data bloat, and that is definitely the case, and so we probably need to do some analysis on those areas where there are a lot of points that would fall into this, and then reach out to those groups and say, hey, if you really are focusing on managing your data going forward, it may be a good idea to, for us to do this routine to combine the points. And it really, kind of depends on, there's so many different factors that whether that would work or not. The problem is that if you go to the next, if you round to the next level, then you're at a point that they're just right on top of each other. And so, there's just by using this method that we used that made it fairly easy from a data standpoint, and it was uniform across the board. So if something was slightly outside of that 20-meter grid, it's not going to combine it. So, it was kind of, it was an easy way to do it. And it also did not make the data, because we retained the original points, exact latitude and longitude, it did not make the data come out looking like a grid when it was mapped either. And I think that's an important fact as well, because we've all seen data sets like that where people, are walking a line and taking points, or in the data looks very gritty.
I will say that we have talked about the challenges of just going ahead and doing it on our own without having partners involved. The reason it worked really well with Utah is that it was their data, they collected it, and that was really important because they were also the ones managing it. So if we tried to do it with some other places where there's a lot of different data sources, there could be an issue of, okay, so yeah, this actually is on parkland, this is on forest land, this is on some other, private property. We don't necessarily want to accidentally make those all kind of one record, because there might be different people managing it or not managing a piece of it or something like that. And so with Utah, they were the ones managing all of that data. So it didn't matter if it was on a county road or a state forest property, because it was the same person that was going to be managing it. And that's something we can run into if we have, heterogeneous data sources. And we accidentally like, oh no, but we need this to be separate because we're managing it one way and this other group's managing theirs either a different way or again, not at all.
Yeah, and you know, there's a couple of comments about John Hogweed in Southern Ontario, and even when it was from a shoreline population, and yeah, I mean the problem is that, you know, in some of those cases you almost need to, I mean, you've got to almost go in and move the points to really get it to where the population is correct. And then, you know, if like Rebecca said, if there's different groups responsible for that, or you're moving, you know, an individual report, then what if they get upset about that, or what if they go try to find their point and it's now a revisit of another point? But it's something that, you know, and maybe there are situations where, you know, you would do it for John Hogweed in an area, because all the involved people are trying to manage it, trying to eradicate. I mean, that would be a good example of something you're probably trying to eradicate. And so there would be a concerted effort, and we can definitely work with John, with you, John, and the other partners to make that work. Other questions? You know, I think, and we can't stress this enough, that we built EDDMapS to be a platform that could be used differently by different people based on what their needs were. And we've seen a lot of that, and we've seen it change over time as people have different needs and different requests. And so I always hate it when somebody says, hey, let's do a thing of all the EDDMapS features, because usually the answer to that is it depends. And so, you know, depending on the scenario, depending on what is needed, and we're always continuing to improve it. I mean, we've had some recent conversations. We just added to EDDMapS Pro the ability to drive or walk a polygon, and that was something that wasn't available before. And so, but that comes with all kinds of issues as well when you start collecting those points that way, and how often you collect them, and those kind of things. You know, probably the next step that needs to be included is walking a trail, and, you know, being able to report different species as you go along the trail, and then making that data set as clean as possible so it's useful to somebody else. So, you know, we're always trying to find the scenarios where somebody needs something, and being able to adapt to those scenarios.
And one thing we kind of didn't get into is onboarding the people. We talked a lot about onboarding like entire groups and entire data sets, entire agencies, but we didn't talk about the effort it can take to get the individual people on board within those groups, agencies. We have worked with groups that have the entire range of, we'll say, technological comfort, where you have someone who knows how to use any app on their phone. They know how to do all kinds of things on a computer. They're very familiar, very comfortable learning new things, but we also have plenty of people who, you know, they know how to make a call, they know how to text, and that's how they use their phone. And who are very hesitant when, you know, oh, I'm afraid I'm going to break something. So there is a lot that goes into the on the ground, getting the individual people on board. And in some cases, like with Minnesota, they are training their interns every single year, because they're getting new interns every single year on how to use these different apps. And so it's working with these different groups. They've come up with a lot of really good ways of onboarding people into using the technology that they decide to use. But there is a lot of different groups we work with that have, you know, everything from student interns to contractors to volunteers, professionals, everything like that. And so we've kind of seen a lot of that as well, getting these different types of people, groups of people on board.
Yeah, and sometimes it's just as simple as walking them through the creating account and logging in process. That you know, they can figure out the rest of it, but sometimes that getting over that hurdle of getting the app on their phone and getting them to download it and log in and with an account and remember their password and all those kind of things. So it just sometimes it's a people problem, sometimes it's a technology problem. And so but thanks everyone. I hadn't seen any other questions, so we'll wrap up for today. Thank y'all for attending. Again, we do these monthly, and we're going to look at some modeling implementations hopefully next month. We've got to reach out to a couple of other speakers, so you won't just be hearing from me and Rebecca and Joe next month. Hopefully we're going to get some outside experts who are doing some modeling and how the data that you contribute can be used to help solve other problems. So thank y'all very much. Have a good weekend and try to stay cool if you're in parts of the country like we are here where it's pretty hot.
And I put in the chat the link to the EDDMapS training page, and the office hours are at the top right of that page, and you can click on the links to go register for the next office hours.
Thank y'all very much. Have a good one.